Steam rolled across the platform in thick white waves as the evacuation train hissed against the iron rails, its doors clanging open and shut, while soldiers ushered civilians forward in urgent lines. The sky was dim with smoke from distant shelling, and the loudspeaker barked destination codes over the restless crowd. She ran the final yards toward Car 4, boots striking wood planks slick with soot, a folded clearance paper clutched tightly in her hand. Just as she reached the steps, the conductor slammed the metal door shut with a violent clang that echoed down the platform. "Full capacity!" he shouted. "Manifest sealed!" The train jolted slightly, as if already eager to move. She struck the door once with her palm. "The manifest is wrong!" she called through the narrow window. Inside, faces turned, but none spoke. A railway officer stepped between her and the carriage. "You're not listed," he said flatly. "Non-essential clearance denied." She lifted the folded paper toward him. "The cargo numbers were altered at dawn. Car 7 carries medical crates misnumbered under civilian code. If this train takes the Eastern Corridor, it will cross Timber Bridge at 1920. The officer frowned. "That's the assigned route." She shook her head. "The timing matches the 9-minute signal interval broadcast from the Ridge telegraph." A whistle shrieked. The engineer leaned from the cabin, awaiting final dispatch. Soldiers began pushing the remaining crowd back from the platform edge. "Step away from the train," a guard ordered. She did not move. "The bridge reinforcement was removed yesterday," she pressed. "If you cross at full load," the final latch clamped into place. The train lurched forward an inch before stopping again at a sharp command from down the platform. "Hold!" The word cut cleanly through the steam. A captain in field coat strode toward the carriage, boots striking the boards with controlled urgency. He glanced once at the departure board, then at her still standing inches from the sealed door. "Why is this train not moving?" he asked the railway officer. "Non-essential denied boarding, sir. Manifest sealed." The captain's eyes shifted to her. "You stopped it." She met his gaze steadily. "The freight ledger was rewritten this morning. Car 7's count does not match depot issuance, and the bridge schedule aligns too precisely with last night's signal bursts." The officer scoffed quietly. She was denied clearance. The captain stepped past him and placed his hand firmly against the cold metal door. The train's engine hissed impatiently. "Open it," he said calmly. The conductor hesitated. "Sir, we are under strict departure orders." The captain's voice did not rise. "Then we verify before we depart." Around them, the crowd quieted. Steam drifted between boots and rail lines as the platform held its breath. She lowered her hand from the door, dust on her sleeve, eyes fixed not on the train, but on the captain now standing between departure and disaster. The steam thinned as the captain signaled for the engineer to cut forward pressure. The locomotive settling into a tense mechanical idle, while the platform filled with uneasy murmurs. The conductor unlocked the carriage reluctantly, metal grinding against metal as the latch lifted. The captain did not board immediately. Instead, he turned toward the small rail office positioned near the freight scale. "Bring me the manifest," he ordered. The railway officer hurried ahead, retrieving a thick, leather-bound ledger from the desk inside the office. Civilians leaned forward from behind the safety line, watching as soldiers formed a loose perimeter around the halted train. The captain opened the ledger across the wooden counter beneath a flickering lantern. Passenger codes filled the first pages, neatly typed with destination stamps in blue ink. Her clearance?" he asked. The officer flipped quickly. "Not listed, sir. Removal from priority transport at 6:40 this morning." The captain raised an eyebrow. "Authorized by whom?" The officer hesitated, then tapped a signature block at the bottom of the page. The ink appeared darker than the surrounding entries. She stepped closer without invitation. "The ink tone doesn't match the earlier entries," she said evenly. "And the clearance code prefix is incorrect. Depot transfers use D4. This shows C4. The railway officer bristled. "Clerical variance." The captain turned the page toward the light. Beneath the fresh signature, faint indentation marks from a prior entry were still visible. "What was written here before?" he asked quietly. No one answered. He moved to the freight section of the manifest. The car assignments were listed in columns: medical, fuel, civilian baggage. "Car 7, he said. The officer read aloud. "Civilian provisions, 36 crates." She shook her head immediately. "Depot issued 42 medical units under red stamp this morning. I logged the count." The captain's gaze shifted. "You logged depot intake?" "Yes, sir, under evacuation oversight." The railway officer interjected. "She was reassigned after clearance removal." The captain's voice remained steady. "Removal that appears overwritten." He closed the ledger slowly. Outside, the engineer leaned from the cabin again, awaiting confirmation. Time pressed against every second. "Open car 7, the captain ordered. The officer stiffened. "Sir, freight seals cannot be broken without confirmation," the captain finished. He stepped onto the platform edge and signaled 2 soldiers forward. Together, they approached the 7th carriage down the line, its freight door secured with a metal clasp stamped that same morning. The captain examined the seal closely. The impression was shallow, uneven, compared to standard depot stamping. "This was applied in haste," he said quietly. He turned back toward the platform office. "If the freight matches the ledger, we depart immediately." Civilians shifted anxiously, some glancing at the darkening sky. She stood beside the carriage, eyes fixed on the metal clasp. "If it doesn't," she added calmly, "then this train is not only mislisted, it's misdirected." The captain nodded once. "Break the seal." The hammer struck metal with a sharp crack, echoing across the silent platform as the freight door slid open. The freight door groaned along its track as 2 soldiers forced it wide enough for lantern light to spill into the dim interior of car 7. The smell hit first. Not grain or civilian provisions, but oil and cold metal. The captain stepped up onto the loading lip, boots scraping against iron as he lifted the lantern higher. Wooden crates were stacked in tight rows, each stamped with civilian ration codes in black ink. She climbed up behind him without waiting for permission, scanning the crate markings with immediate focus. "That stamp is wrong," she said quietly, pointing to the top row. "Civilian provisions use single-line serial numbers. These are double-lined." The captain crouched beside one crate and ran his thumb across the stencil. The paint was still tacky. "Fresh," he observed. A soldier pried open the nearest box with a crowbar. The lid cracked upward to reveal not flour or canned goods, but neatly packed medical kits bearing depot red stamps partially sanded away. "Medical supply diversion," the lieutenant muttered from below. 42 units, she said firmly. "Exactly what was issued this morning." The captain ordered another crate opened. Inside, beneath layers of folded canvas, rested compact signal transmitters wired to small battery packs. "Same interference models as depot shed," a soldier noted grimly. The captain stepped deeper into the carriage, lantern beam sweeping across the far corner. Beneath a false wooden floor panel lay tightly coiled wire attached to what appeared to be a rail detonator clamp. "Bridge sabotage," he said evenly. She nodded. "If the train crossed Timber Bridge at scheduled speed, grouped under full load, the detonation timing would align." The lieutenant climbed up beside them. "Explosives in freight?" The captain shook his head. "Not here. Likely pre-rigged on the bridge supports. These transmitters would synchronize the trigger." Outside, civilians strained to see what was unfolding inside the open carriage. Murmurs grew louder as soldiers carried out exposed equipment one by one. The railway officer stood pale near the platform office, sweat visible at his collar despite the cooling evening air. The captain examined the floor panel more closely and found fresh saw marks along the edges. "This carriage was modified after depot departure," he said. She stepped toward the doorway and addressed the platform calmly. The freight ledger was altered to conceal medical cargo and embed signal equipment. The train was scheduled to reach the bridge at 1920 under synchronized grouping. The crowd fell silent again. The captain descended from the carriage and faced the railway officer. "Who authorized Car 7's reassignment?" the officer stammered. "The order arrived by telegraph at 5:55. She turned sharply. Depot telegraph was quiet at that hour. The captain's eyes narrowed. "Bring me the telegram." Soldiers escorted the officer back to the platform office, while others continued inspecting adjacent wagons. In Car 8, they discovered mismarked fuel barrels positioned to increase forward weight concentration, ideal for structural collapse if the bridge supports failed. The pattern was no longer coincidence. It was orchestration. The captain returned to Car 7's open doorway and looked toward the darkening rail line stretching east. "If we had departed on schedule," he said quietly, "we would have met that bridge at full load." She stood beside him, dust on her sleeve, gaze steady. "And at perfect timing." The lantern flickered against the metal walls as the train remained motionless, its sealed departure transformed into exposed sabotage. The station telegraph room sat at the far end of the platform, a narrow chamber lined with wires running up the walls like exposed veins. The rhythmic tapping of Morse keys had resumed after the train halt, operators pretending normalcy, while tension rippled through the station yard. The captain entered without announcement. The railway officer escorted behind him, pale and silent. She followed closely, her attention already fixed on the message board pinned beside the central transmitter. "All outbound confirmations to Eastern Corridor," the captain ordered. The chief operator handed over a strip of telegraph tape, its perforated code still warm from the machine. The captain scanned it quickly. "Departure authorization 5:55, he read. "Bridge clearance confirmed." She stepped forward and pointed to the timestamp. "Look at the spacing." The dots and dashes formed precise blocks, too evenly spaced to be natural manual transmission. "That's machine-assisted rhythm," she said calmly. "Not hand-keyed." The operator frowned. "We don't use automated relay here." The captain compared it with an earlier message strip pinned below. The earlier strip showed subtle variations in spacing and depth. The newer one was mechanically consistent, almost sterile. "Where did this originate?" he asked. The operator hesitated. "Signal relay," indicated Ridgeline substation. She shook her head. "That substation was damaged 2 weeks ago." Silence settled in the cramped room. The captain stepped toward the wall map where signal routes were drawn in pencil lines connecting depots, bridges, and junction towers. "If the ridge relay was offline," he said evenly, "then this message was injected locally." The operator swallowed. "Sir, the signal strength reading did show unusual stability." She nodded once. "Because it wasn't transmitted from distance. It was looped from nearby." The captain motioned for the secondary receiver to be activated. A faint clicking resumed beneath the room's low hum, the same steady rhythm they had disrupted earlier, with staggered convoy timing. The technician adjusted the dial slowly. "Origin is within 1 kilometer, he confirmed. "Somewhere between platform yard and rail bend." The captain's gaze shifted to the railway officer. "Who has access to the telegraph junction box near the freight line?" The officer hesitated too long. "Maintenance crew and?" the captain pressed. "Bridge inspection detail," the officer finished quietly. She turned toward the captain. "If bridge inspectors were compromised, the detonator placement would already be complete." The captain straightened. "Prepare a scout detachment immediately." He turned back to the telegraph board and ripped the false confirmation strip free, holding it up for everyone in the room to see. "This departure was engineered," he said calmly. Outside, the train's engine released a low hiss, impatient and unaware. The captain placed the strip beside the manifest ledger from the platform office. 2 falsified systems, he noted. Freight and routing. She stepped closer to the map again, tracing a finger along the rail line eastward. If we leave now under altered grouping, the detonation window will misalign. But if the bridge rigging is already active, scouts must verify before crossing. The captain nodded. We control the departure and the route. He turned toward the door. Seal the telegraph junction and detain bridge inspection personnel for questioning. As soldiers moved swiftly through the yard, the telegraph room fell into uneasy quiet. The pattern was no longer hidden. It had been engineered to mimic legitimacy. But now, under scrutiny, its precision had betrayed it. Dusk settled over the station yard in a wash of steel-blue light as officers gathered beside the halted train, their boots striking the wooden planks with restrained urgency. The engine hissed steadily, steam curling around lantern posts while civilians waited in anxious silence along the platform edge. The senior rail commander arrived from headquarters car, coat buttoned tight, expression sharpened by impatience. This evacuation is already behind schedule, he stated flatly. We cannot stall every departure on suspicion. The captain stood firm near the open freight carriage. We are beyond suspicion, he replied evenly. We have falsified cargo, injected telegrams, and signal interference traced within perimeter. The commander exhaled sharply. And yet the bridge has not detonated. The corridor remains clear. She stepped forward, a voice controlled but precise. Because the timing window hasn't aligned yet. Several officers turned toward her, with visible skepticism. She continued without raising her tone. The manifest assigned grouped carriage weight to reach Timber Bridge at 1920 under full load. The telegraph confirmation reinforced that schedule. If bridge rigging is synchronized to carriage grouping, the detonation requires uninterrupted timing. The commander folded his arms. You are proposing we disrupt our own rhythm based on probability. The captain answered before she could. Based on engineered pattern. He pointed toward the freight car, where exposed transmitters lay stacked on a crate. These were not placed for coincidence. The commander glanced toward the darkening horizon. Headquarters expects delivery to Western Junction by midnight, the captain replied calmly. Headquarters expects that train intact. Silence stretched across the yard. Civilians shifted uneasily, sensing the weight of decision without understanding its technical details. She stepped closer to the platform board, where carriage numbers were written in chalk. Car 7 and 8 were positioned mid-train to concentrate structural load at the bridge's weakest support, she explained. If we redistribute carriage order and stagger departure speed, the synchronization fails. One lieutenant murmured, even if rigged, reduced grouping could absorb shock. The commander studied her briefly. And if we are wrong? The captain answered without hesitation. Then we lose minutes, not lives. The yard held still, the steam drifting in thin clouds between officers' boots. The commander finally nodded once. You have 10 minutes to reconfigure, no longer. The captain turned immediately. Break formation. Redistribute freight. Car 7 detached. Car 8 repositioned to rear. Soldiers moved swiftly, uncoupling suspect wagons while mechanics adjusted brake lines. She climbed into the first carriage to speak directly with the engineer. Departure in staggered intervals, she instructed. Reduce speed approaching rail bend until scout signal clears bridge. The engineer nodded, tension visible in his jaw. Lanterns flickered along the platform as wheels were realigned. The commander watched silently, arms still crossed, but no longer objecting. The departure board was wiped clean and rewritten with altered times. The rhythm of the station shifted from routine to calculated adaptation. As the final coupling snapped into place, the captain glanced toward her. Once we move, we control the tempo. She answered quietly, and break theirs. The whistle blew once, short, deliberate signaling preparation under new order. The lantern light flickered across the platform as the captain stepped back onto the train's iron stair and reached for the conductor's manifest folder. Steam drifted between them, softening nothing. Hand it to me, he said calmly. The conductor hesitated, only a second before surrendering the leather-bound ledger. The captain flipped it open against the carriage wall, scanning carriage assignments under the fading light. Car 7 detached, Car 8 repositioned to rear. Passenger grouping staggered between compartments 2 and 5. He drew a pencil from his coat pocket and struck through the original assignments with deliberate lines. Civilians watched through carriage windows as soldiers uncoupled the suspect freight wagon and rolled it aside under guard. The railway commander stood near the platform office, silent now, observing rather than contesting. She stepped beside the captain and pointed to the departure column. Original speed projection reaches Timber Bridge at peak grouping. Reduce throttle before rail bend. Let distance widen between compartments. The captain nodded and wrote a new time entry beneath the crossed-out schedule. Departure at 1847. Compartment spacing at 6-minute intervals. He closed the ledger briefly and looked toward the engineer. No synchronized acceleration. Maintain uneven cadence. The engineer signaled acknowledgement with a raised hand. Soldiers carried the exposed transmitters from Car 7 into a guarded stack near the telegraph room, proof of the deception that had nearly sent the train toward disaster. She moved along the platform, checking carriage windows and confirming passenger counts. Reassign those from Car 7 to the rear cars, she instructed a sergeant. Keep weight distributed. The final coupling snapped as Car 8 was repositioned at the end of the train. The captain reopened the manifest and rewrote the carriage list line by line, his handwriting firm and legible. This departure runs under revised authority, he said evenly, signing the bottom margin with controlled pressure. The conductor glanced at the amended ledger. Sir, this overrides station command. The captain met his eyes. It overrides sabotage. A brief whistle sounded from the engine cabin. Steam pressure built again, but this time under measured control. She stepped up onto the stair beside him. If bridge rigging is active, the detonator expects grouping within seconds of peak weight. But breaking the tempo forces misfire. The captain gave a slight nod. And if they attempt manual trigger, then scouts positioned before the bend will intercept. The first carriage door slid shut with a heavy metallic thud. Unlike before, it did not signal exclusion. It signaled readiness. The captain handed the amended manifest back to the conductor. You depart under this order. The conductor swallowed and nodded. Soldiers stepped back from the wheels as the engine released a long hiss. The train began to move. Not in a surge, but in a controlled roll, each carriage maintaining deliberate distance from the next. Civilians inside gripped seats, uncertain but trusting the command unfolding outside. As the last carriage cleared the platform, the captain and she remained watching until the train disappeared beyond the station bend. The rhythm had changed. The timing had shifted. What had begun as sealed departure now moved under rewritten authority, its tempo no longer predictable. The train moved through the darkening countryside in uneven cadence, each carriage separated by deliberate distance as instructed, wheels striking the rails with staggered rhythm instead of synchronized thunder. Ahead, 2 scout motorcycles rode parallel to the track along the dirt service road, their headlamps dimmed to narrow beams. The captain stood in the forward observation compartment beside the engineer, watching the line curve toward the timbered rail bend that led to Timber Bridge. She remained near the secondary signal panel, headset pressed lightly to one ear, listening for any attempt to reintroduce interference into the line. The bridge silhouette appeared in the distance, dark against the fading sky, wooden supports stretching across a narrow river cut. Reduce throttle, the captain ordered calmly. The engineer complied, the easing steam pressure so the train slowed just before the bend. The staggered spacing widened further. From the ridge above the bridge, a faint flash blinked. Once, then twice, searching for synchronized approach. They're expecting grouping, she said quietly. The captain gave a short nod. Maintain irregular pace. The lead scout motorcycle suddenly stopped near the base of the bridge and signaled sharply with a raised arm. The train slowed further. Soldiers dismounted from the second carriage as it rolled nearly to a halt, rifles ready. The captain stepped down onto the gravel as the engine idled low. The scout approached quickly. "Explosive rigging confirmed beneath central support," he reported. "Wire runs along underside toward eastern embankment." The captain's expression remained steady. "Manual trigger?" "Likely," the scout replied. "Signal relay misfired when train timing broke." She moved closer to the bridge approach, eyes scanning the rail supports. Beneath the timber crossbeams, she spotted thin wiring glinting faintly in lantern light. "Detonator timed to peak compression," she said. "If full load crossed at once, structural shock would complete the circuit." The captain turned toward the second scout unit positioned higher along the ridge. "Sweep the embankment." Moments later, a burst of controlled rifle fire echoed from the eastern slope. Two figures attempted to flee through brush, only to be intercepted by rail security soldiers advancing from the rear carriage. The irregular timing had forced the saboteurs to act prematurely, exposing themselves before detonation alignment could occur. One of them attempted to ignite a manual trigger, but the shortened gap between carriages disrupted the pressure timing completely. The captain advanced beneath the bridge with two engineers, who began cutting the visible wires carefully. She stood near the support beam, observing the device configuration. "Battery pack housed in a wooden casing along the bank," she noted. "They expected synchronized arrival at 1920. The captain checked his watch. It was 1918. The train remained split along the bend, its weight dispersed. Soldiers secured the captured saboteurs and retrieved a small transmitter from the brush, identical to those discovered in Car 7. The pattern was undeniable. "They designed this for certainty," the lieutenant muttered. "Certainty requires predictability," the captain replied. He looked back toward the engine. "Reinforce the bridge supports temporarily. We cross in divided segments." Engineers wedged steel braces along the weakened beam, while the train resumed motion, one carriage at a time. The first crossed slowly, wood creaking but holding. Then the second, spaced wide. Each segment passed safely across the sabotage span. When the final carriage cleared the bridge, the detonator lay disarmed in pieces beneath the riverbank lantern light. The ridge fell silent, except for the fading hum of the train resuming controlled speed beyond the crossing. The ambush had not failed because of force, but because its timing had been broken. The train returned to the station under controlled escort just before full darkness settled across the yard. Word had already spread ahead of it. Civilians who had remained behind stood along the platform edge, lanterns casting long shadows across the boards. The same departure bell that had nearly rung in routine now remained still. As the engine slowed and released a steady hiss of steam, soldiers stepped down first, forming a perimeter. The captain followed, boots striking the wood with measured pace. She descended behind him, dust along her sleeve, expression composed. The railway commander stood near the telegraph office, no longer impatient, but waiting. "Bridge?" he asked quietly. "Rigged," the captain answered evenly. "Detonator timed for grouped compression at 1920. Murmurs moved through the gathered crowd. The captain signaled, and soldiers carried forward the recovered detonator casing, the cut wiring, and the transmitter unit retrieved from the ridge. He placed them atop a crate at the center of the platform. "This was positioned beneath Timber Bridge," he said clearly, voice carrying across the silent yard. "The manifest alteration, telegraph injection, and freight mislabeling were designed to ensure synchronized arrival." He held up the original manifest page with crossed-out carriage assignments still visible. "The timing was engineered." The railway commander stepped forward slowly. "And the bridge?" "Reinforced temporarily," the captain replied. Crossed in divided segments. Civilians exchanged glances of disbelief, some realizing how close the train had come to destruction. She remained beside the crate, watching the faces of those who had seen the doors shut earlier. The captain turned slightly toward her. "The freight discrepancy and telegraph pattern were identified before departure," he continued, addressing the platform as a whole. Without that intervention, this train would not have returned. No applause broke the silence. Instead, a quiet weight settled over the crowd. The realization of narrow escape. A child clutched his mother's coat tighter. An elderly man removed his cap slowly. The railway commander looked toward her directly. "Your clearance removal was unauthorized," he said formally. "It will be corrected," she nodded once. "The ledger will need revision as well," she replied calmly. The captain gave a brief signal, and soldiers removed the exposed devices from public view, securing them for evidence transfer. The telegraph office lights dimmed as operators suspended outbound confirmations pending new verification codes. The platform that had nearly witnessed departure without scrutiny now stood under a recalibrated order. As civilians reboarded under revised grouping, doors closing with steady metallic thuds, the air felt different, not frantic, but grounded. The captain paused before stepping back onto the carriage stair. "Departure in staggered cadence," he instructed the engineer once more. The whistle blew softly this time, not urgent, not rushed. As the train began its second departure, lantern light reflected along the rail lines, steady and unbroken. The platform remained silent, not from fear, but from understanding. Months later, Timber Bridge no longer stood vulnerable beneath improvised wiring and concealed detonators. Steel reinforcement plates lined its central supports, and a permanent patrol detail monitored the rail bend where the ambush had nearly unfolded. The evacuation train that had once hesitated at the platform now ran that corridor regularly under revised protocol. Staggered spacing, dual signal verification, and manifest crosscheck before every departure. Inside Rail Command's oversight office, a new ledger system replaced the old, handwritten manifest book. Each cargo entry required dual authentication, and telegraph confirmations passed through layered routing rather than single-point injection. Her name appeared at the bottom of the updated verification roster under signal oversight and freight audit. She moved calmly between desks, reviewing stamped pages and transmission strips with practiced attention. The captain, reassigned to oversee transport security across the sector, visited during quarterly inspection. He paused beside the updated routing board where departure times were deliberately offset in irregular cadence. "The staggered departure is now standard," he observed. She nodded. Predictability was the vulnerability. Outside the window, a freight convoy rolled past the yard, each carriage separated by measured distance. The captain glanced toward the rail map pinned on the wall, the eastern corridor marked with reinforced checkpoints and dual scout deployment. "The bridge incident altered doctrine," he said quietly. She responded without looking up from the ledger. "It altered assumption." Reports filed to headquarters described the thwarted sabotage not as heroism, but as procedural correction, evidence-first review, adaptive timing, and layered verification. The railway commander, who once pressed for departure, now enforced clearance checks personally before each evacuation run. Civilians boarding trains no longer saw hurried manifest stamping. They saw methodical confirmation. The platform itself had changed. Where steam once clouded uncertainty, order now carried weight. The captain stepped toward the doorway before pausing. "The doors closed once," he said evenly. "They won't close that way again." She placed the verified ledger into its slot and turned toward the window where another train departed under steady rhythm. "Because the timing changed," she replied. Outside, the whistle sounded, not as warning but as assurance. The route held, the corridor remained intact, and the lesson carried forward quietly across every rail line that followed. Authority without verification invites disaster. Authority grounded in evidence preserves it. War runs on schedules, but survival runs on judgment. If this story moved you, subscribe to Clara at War for more WWII mission dramas, where timing, discipline, and courage decide who makes it home. Sometimes history doesn't change on the battlefield. It changes on a platform, seconds before departure.